If you're old enough to have daily responsibilities that, unfortunately, you can't neglect, you would remember an anime of the past called The Devil is a Part-Timer. It's a comedy about Satan working for McDonald's, pretty much. You may even call it a reverse isekai. Nothing unusual, especially by today's standards. Now, the anime was quite popular when it came out, and it even held a high ground for a few good years after. Everybody was recommending it was on every anime comedy list. Remember those top 10 lists? Very easy to cosplay too. I wouldn't say it was massive, but it was certainly huge. Now, why am I even bringing this up? Interestingly enough, almost a decade later, the anime got a sequel. And then the sequel got a sequel for itself too. That's quite a big gap between seasons, 9 whole years. I'm very curious to know how many of you have heard about it and how many of you have watched it when it came out. Chances are that the people who enjoyed The Devil is a Part-Timer might not even watch anime anymore. Surely nobody actually waited 9 years for the second season. Now, the sequel was a step down in terms of animation. That's something everybody who watched both agrees with, but they also agree that, compared to the first season, the story was all over the place, the characters felt different, the comedy was subpar. But is that actually true? Or are people just talking with their nostalgia goggles on? How many of them rewatched the first season before jumping into the next? I did. That was me. See, The Devil is a Part-Timer just didn't age very well. I found the sequel slightly worse than the first season, animation aside, because that's another thing we don't want to get into. But the first season was nowhere near as good as I remembered. A lot of the jokes don't land that well, and most of the subversions are common nowadays and quite dated. And these are the key phrases here: common nowadays and dated. This really makes me think about this anime called Love, Election and Chocolate. You may or may not have heard about it, I don't blame you if you didn't, but when I first watched it in 2012, I liked it quite a lot and I still remember liking it until I rewatched it recently, or tried to. If you're wondering what is it about, I want you to imagine every single anime trope and cliché you can think of, from every dere type to tropes to high school student councils that control everything. I'm telling you, every single cliché is this anime. Today, I wouldn't even recommend it to my worst enemy. But you see, in 2012, this was anime. Generally speaking, because there were shows that set themselves apart, but generally, these clichés and tropes were what gave anime its flavor. If you skim through the shows of the year of 2012, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Man, speaking of 2012, I just realized how packed the fall season was. I mean, I literally watched 26 out of the 40 that came out. Fucking degenerate. Anyway, would these clichés and tropes hold up nowadays? Fuck no. I couldn't even finish the first episode. It was painful on so many levels. I feared for my life. It was unbelievable. But back then, it was different. See what I mean? When you take a show that was great in 2013 like The Devil is a Part-Timer and give it a sequel 9 years later, no, it's not going to work. Things that worked a decade ago will most likely not work nowadays. These tropes, clichés, stereotypes, settings, these aspects that dominated a certain period of anime, that dominated a specific era of anime, will not hold up for years to come. Those of you who watch anime on TV might remember this show called Full Metal Panic. It's an action mecha show with interesting characters and quite a lot of goofy comedy. It was my first exposure to the mecha genre and I still hold fond memories towards it. Now, the anime broadcast ended in 2005 with a third season. It didn't fully adapt the manga though, and so a fourth season was announced 13 years later. Obviously, the hype and the popularity of the show died completely, but I still watched it for nostalgia's sake, and it was aight. It made me think about how the OG Tsundere trope kind of vanished from today's anime. Kaname Chidori is a classic tsundere that ticks all the boxes, the old school type, which arguably isn't a trope that aged very well. However, what I notice is that being a tsundere character nowadays is just a superficial thing. Some people even came up with the term soft tsundere to describe them. The trope slowly lost its popularity and is now just a shell of its former self. And that's fine. It keeps the anime medium in a constant progression, but it also means that our preferences progress and change as well, and that will inevitably make it so that certain anime will get worse with time, especially those that focus more on the meta at the time. The best example of this is Lucky Star. It's one of those anime that you had to watch when it happened, because all of the jokes and references, which was the bread and butter of the anime, were meta. They made sense and were funny at the time. Watching Lucky Star now makes no fucking sense. A less extreme example would be something like Fruits Basket, one of the many remakes of older anime. I watched it back then cause, well, there weren't that many anime to watch to begin with, but I liked it. It was great for its time and it's without a doubt one of the most popular shoujo series. Now 2019 comes and Fruits Basket gets a remake. Nostalgia got the better of me and I jumped right into it, only to find that it was so painfully stuck in time. It's similar to the situation with Koi Choco that I mentioned previously, but definitely not as bad. The characters, the structure, the jokes, the drama, all stuck in time. I mean, it's adapting a 1998 manga, so of course you would feel like 1998, but what might have been fresh in the shoujo world at the time won't necessarily hold up today. That's how I felt throughout the first whole season. Yes, I've watched it, it was easy to binge. I couldn't bribe myself to watch the rest of the seasons though. But what about something you actually loved when it came out and believed you still loved it for a really long time, only to recently rewatch it and question your fucking sanity? Is it a bit specific? Well, I'll reveal that I loved Oregairu when it came out. There weren't many nihilistic protagonists at the time and certainly nobody was as quirky as Hachiman. He was this bitter and antisocial guy who just didn't want to fit in, as his past school experiences have been on the negative side. It offered the perspective of somebody who was rejected too much and chose only to rely on himself. Another thing that I loved was the dialogue between Hachiman and Yukino. They always had this great back and forth dynamic which made their conversations very captivating, or so I thought. See, I was still in high school when the first season dropped. The high school me found Oregairu to be very profound, quite fascinating even, and I have held that opinion since the second season concluded in 2015. However, in 2020, surprise surprise, comes another season. This one aims to conclude the whole story. And of course I watched it, I was really looking forward to it, all those fond memories and emotions revived in me. But here's the twist. I didn't like it one fucking bit. I found it rather boring, a bit cringe at times, shallow. What the fuck happened? I thought maybe it was just this final season, which all things considered was quite weak compared to the others, so I took a break and tried to rewatch it from the beginning. I didn't even make it past 3 episodes, and that came as a shock to me. Sure, I wasn't expecting to like it as much, but to not even find it remotely interesting? Oh boy. That made me contemplate a bit because most of my favorite anime are fairly old now. Durarara, Blast of Tempest, Golden Time, the Monogatari series, there are quite a few, I'm not gonna list all of them, and I haven't rewatched them in years. So now I'm thinking, if I were to rewatch them, would I still find them as good as I did back then? I mean, Oregairu was a favorite of mine and now it's in fucking shambles. I kinda want to keep the memories I have with them, but I also want to know if my opinion would change drastically, and so I picked the second worst choice. I found my old Mal account, I checked the anime I rated high and I still consider really good to this day, and I started watching. Hold up, I gave Nishiro Days a 9? I remember exactly nothing from this anime. Let's not talk about it. After rewatching quite a few of the high rated anime on my list because, well, I've been that sick for the past 2 weeks, so time I have. I realized that 91 Days is still amazing, highly recommend, while Classroom of the Elite, Masamune's Kun Revenge, Elfen Lied, Parasite, Pandora Hearts, Aoharu Ride, and so fucking on, are not what I once thought. My disappointment is immeasurable and my day is ruined.